Welcome to the latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm Greg Story, your host today. I'm the president of Dale Carnegie Training Japan, and my special guest is an old client and friend of mine, Andrew Hankinson, who is the president in Japan of Zwilling J.A. Henckels. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you very much. You got the name perfect. Most people always mess that up, but you did perfect.
Well, thank you very much for that. And, I've listened to your podcast, and I recommend everyone to listen to Now and Zen. It's a great podcast.
Thank you.
It's a little bit different. There's some way only look at leadership, but yours is a bit more broad. And so I recommend people, if you're interested in Japan, certainly have a listen to Andrew's podcast. I consider it excellent. I'm a fan.
Thank you.
I listen to all the episodes. And so in yours, you're talking to business people. It's a general discussion. We're talking about leadership. But in your podcast, I've listened to you talk about yourself at different times, about the work you've had in Japan. You've had a very unique and interesting career in Japan. So can you just get us to how are you here today in this current job? How did you get to this point? Tell us your Japan story.
You got it. Thank you very much, Greg. Thank you also for mentioning about my podcast. But compared to you, my friend, I am only swimming in your wake. You are the innovator and you are the pioneer when it comes to podcasting. So anyway, you're an inspiration for me as well. But thank you for the props. Getting to my story, my Japan story, nearly it's all my life. I grew up with many relatives that lived in Japan. So as a child, I had an influence from Japan, whether it be stories or photos or omiyage, presents or whatever it was. So
how is that? I mean, most people don't grow up with a family who have a connection with Japan. Was it through the military? Was it through missionary work, business? Why were they involved with Japan?
I had a couple uncles that were interested in Japan. They came to Japan to study, one in Kyoto and another one in Niigata and another one, actually three uncles that lived in Japan, and just through their influence. And
That's amazing.
It was just a happenstance. It's almost like it's destiny.
Yeah, really.
So yeah, I wish I had a more concrete story, but my family just kind of fell into it.
And where
like
are you
that.
from in the States?
I am from Seattle.
Seattle. So you went to school there, or what
I did.
happened? Yeah.
I did indeed. However, before I went to school in Seattle, I first came to Japan when I was 16 years old as one of those kind of summer exchange programs.
Right.
And like I said, I grew up hearing stories about Japan, having some Japan influence. And so I thought, when I was 16, maybe I will go to Japan for the summer. I had an opportunity, and I did. And so that really lit the fire, and I decided, hey, I really like Japan. I like the language. I like the culture, all that stuff. And so I started studying Japanese in high school. And when I graduated...
Did they offer Japanese in Seattle at that time?
No, they did not.
Okay.
However, they required a foreign language credit to graduate from high school.
Okay, that's interesting.
And the university very close to my high school did offer Japanese. So I petitioned my high school principal and said, can I take the Japanese class at the university and use that credit for my high school graduation? And he said, yeah, sure, of course, if you don't mind, or if you think you can handle a college level language class, be my guest. So, between social studies and PE, I would get on my little bicycle and I would cruise up to the university. I would take my Japanese class, get back on my bike and go back to high school.
Well, that's interesting. The university accepted you as a high school student to come into the campus and do a formal course.
That's correct.
That's very flexible,
Yeah, I don't know. I just made a request. It all happened. I don't know how rare that is. I don't know if it happens today.
It's interesting. Sure. In Australia, many high schools offer Japanese. When I was at high school, my high schools back in the 60s, my high school didn't offer Japanese, but...
Did they have high schools back then?
They did. And the neighbouring high school, this is back in about 64, they had Japanese. Back in 64 in Australia, had Japanese at that point.
Really?
So very long history in Australia of studying Japanese at high school. So that's interesting. You had a great opportunity. So keep up with the story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
then when I graduated high school, I said, you know what? I am going to make my fame. I'm going to make my fortune. I'm going to go to Japan. And so when I was 18 years old, I came here. I worked at the very first Nova school, which was in Osaka. And I was an English teacher there with no real qualifications other than being a native English speaker. And so I worked a couple of years in Osaka, and I realized, probably without a university degree, I'm not going to get much fame nor fortune. Therefore, I went back to the U.S., entered university, and studied for 4 years, and I got a double major in international business and Japanese language.
Very good.
Yeah. So graduated with those credentials. I actually got my first job right out of university, was here in Japan, because Recruit, I don't know if they still have it or not, but Recruit used to have this recruiting seminar in the United States specifically for Japanese exchange students to do that whole shushoku katsudo recruiting activities to find their job when they graduate from university.
What year are we talking here?
This was in 1991.
91, right? So the bubble is just burst, basically. Before that, and so right, okay, go on.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they also accept American students as well to this. It's called DISCO. It was the name of the organization. Like I said, I don't know if it's still around.
Still going.
Or not. Is it? Okay.
As far as I know.
And so, as long as you speak Japanese, and I did speak some Japanese at that point after studying Japanese for quite a few years, they do allow you to American students to also participate in the seminar, which I did. And long story short, I got a job.
Wow.
Through this seminar. So I already had a job lined up with a Japanese company before I even graduated from university.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
So I came in 91 with my first job here in Japan. It wasn't my ideal job. It wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. However, it was a foot in the door, as they say. And I just wanted to get here. I wanted to work here. And so I did. And then from there, I would, try to, make my way. And so I worked for the first company, was a Japanese company. I worked for them for 3 years. I then moved to another.
So what were you doing for those 3 years? What was the work?
I was a buyer.
Okay.
A menswear buyer. See, you should be the menswear buyer now because you've got the necktie, you've got the gorgeous looking suit and the pocket chief and all that thing going there. Anyway, I'm just joking. But I had no experience with that. They taught me. That's the one thing about Japanese companies is when you work for a Japanese company, they really teach you the basics, especially if you're a new employee. They teach you, they don't teach you so much, the practical information that's related specifically to your job, but more so to function within the company. And I'm really glad that I had that experience at a young age. I don't know if I would be able to handle it now, but at the time I was 23 years old. And I'm very thankful for the experience. I learned so much about working for a Japanese company, about working in Japan, the culture, the communication style, the things that are not said in communication, et cetera, et cetera.
So in fact, and that's interesting because we're talking about leadership today as a theme. So you are experiencing hardcore Japanese domestic company leadership as a recipient. So how was the receiving part of that as you're noticing, okay, this is how they lead in Japan. Did anything stick out for you on how they led people?
There was some frustration at that time because a lot of the things that they were teaching me I thought were very, very basic, based on common sense, but a lot of it was just really drilled into you. It was repetition. It was almost militaristic in a way. I mean, there was times where we did gashuku, where we would spend a Friday and a Saturday and a Sunday at a dormitory, and we would have classes all day long on. And I worked for a department store, Japanese department store. At the time, it was the world's largest department store. And that's one of the reasons why they hired me was because at the time, internationalization was a bit of a key word. And so they thought they had to hire a couple of foreigners.
This must be Daimaru then, I would guess.
Negative, no, it was not.
Okay.
And so, I learned how to do that gift wrapping.
Okay.
They talked about how deep you bow and what you wear and how you package things and wrap things up and how you address people, how you address customers and your superiors and et cetera, all of those things that are taken for granted with Japanese and Japanese society. For me, it was eye-opening. And I started this whole explanation off by saying I was frustrated. And there were times where I was, but in hindsight, it was a really great foundation to living and working in Japan. So, and that was a very large company. As I said, at the time, it was the largest department store in the world. I think they were only the largest department store in the world for like 6 months because I think they built a larger department store in Dubai or somewhere in the Middle East later. So they held the title for about 6 months, but I was there during that time. And I worked in the menswear department, and I was a buyer. I knew nothing about fashion. I still don't, obviously. But I did learn a lot, and I really appreciated the opportunity that was given to me. I am still in contact with the chairman of the department store.
Very good.
And even when I got my current position, I went and met him. I gave him my business card, and I said to him, thank you very much for initially hiring me in 1991, which was literally 30 years ago now. And thanks to you, this is what I've done in it wasn't 30 years at the time, it was 23 years. And we just had a really nice conversation. So we're
at
still in
that
touch
time, he wouldn't have been chairman. He would have been something, a senior executive.
I think he was president.
Oh, he's president, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
managing director or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but working for a Japanese department store, you kind of see your career path. It's a typical Japanese company where you progress through the ranks, and it's based more on years of service than it is your input and your results. And that was a little frustrating for me because I'm a very results-oriented person. And, I said, hey, look, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. I want to be recognized for it. I want to be compensated for it. And that's really not what working for a true traditional Japanese company is all about. So I made a move after 3 years, and I moved to another Japanese company then, but it was much smaller. It was a very exciting company, and it was a little bit more in the industry that I was really interested in, which was the travel industry. And it was a travel publishing company. And my job was, and this is before the internet, so my job was to go around the world and sell promotions and advertising space and exposure in our Japanese language publications for travel agents. And so that was my main job. It was a great job, had a lot of fun. And it was a small company. I was the first foreigner hired at the department store. And then I was the first foreigner hired in the second Japanese company, which was a little bit smaller. And it was quite interesting because I've heard a lot of kind of horror stories, I should say, about some foreigners that have worked in Japanese companies. I've interviewed a couple guys on my podcast about that. But for me, they hired me, and for the most part, they were like, well, what do you want to do?
So this is interesting. You've got the very established, very large Japanese corporation, a lot of procedures, very well organized, lots of drilling, everything taken care of. Now you're working for a much smaller company. What was the leadership contrast for the smaller company and how they led you compared to the larger company?
Great question, and exactly what you just said. With the larger Japanese companies, there was so much formality. We started every morning with a chode. It was extremely strict on that. Every morning you have to, clock in or put your hanko on, and just all the procedures. It was a bit officious, I would say, but that's the way they do it. And it is what it is. And I dealt with it, and it didn't hurt me. It was, it wasn't painful, but it was, coming from an extremely individualistic society such as the United States to a very group-oriented, group-think society like Japan, and be in that work environment was, regardless of the fact that I already spoke Japanese, I'd lived in Japan earlier, I understood it. It got a bit tedious at times, but like I said, I was young, and so I was able to handle it. Getting back to your question, so the second company was a lot smaller. I think we only had about 25, 30 employees. I was the first person, or I was the first foreigner hired there. And like I said, they said, we like the influence, we like the ideas, we like the potential innovation that maybe a foreigner brings to the workplace. So welcome to the company. What do you want to do? And so they were very flexible and they were very open. And sure, there was a lot of rules there too that were, and we'll get into that probably later when it comes to rules in the work environment. But I found that it was, I had a great time, I had a lot of flexibility, and it still to this day was one of the most enjoyable work experiences I ever had.
So were they very comfortable with you failing? For example, Japan's a defect zero culture and no mistake culture. And yet innovation is failing and learning from failure. Do they accept things that you tried that failed?
Well, it's kind of hard to answer. I don't want to say, hey, I didn't fail, but sure, I'm sure there must have been some failures. But like I said, they really didn't know how to deal with me. And I'll get into this later, but I had a couple early quick wins. And I initiated a couple things that were new that I thought of, which is exactly why they hired me. And luckily, I was successful with those. So everything that I did after that, they were much more open-minded to, and they were much more relaxed to, whether I didn't completely accomplish my targets or not. Maybe I got close enough. But that's kind of the way Japanese business is. There's really not 100% accountability for everything in Japanese companies. And in this environment, even if I did fail, I wasn't held, too responsible for those things. But I think it really helped that I had a couple quick wins to begin with. And that got the momentum going, got the trust going, which helped.
Yeah. And so what happens next?
Oh, what happens next? Well, I had a couple other stops along the way. However, I think the point that I'd like to make is I've been working in Japan for 30 years. My whole professional career has been in Japan, and I am at the position where I am now because it was a strategic decision that I made that, I'm not a big job hopper, but I've had about 6 jobs since I've been in Japan for these 30 years. But each career move that I made sure that it was a step up in terms of knowledge, experience, and title. And that always helped me along the way to get to the next position, and so forth. So that was very strategic. So I had a title of country manager for a I won't say very small, but a much smaller company than my current company before I had this job. However, if I had not had that title of country manager, I probably wouldn't have even been considered for the interview for this job.
So let's talk about that. You've gone from working in companies, now you're a country manager, and presumably this is your first time as the boss?
Right.
So, okay, let's talk about that a little bit. So you've gone from being an employee, now you're responsible for other people. How many people are you looking after?
My first role was, like I said, it was a very small company. I think it was only 7 people.
Right, okay. So what did you find managing 7 people? Because 7 people, it sounds like 7 people, but if you have problems in a small company, they are absolutely amplified and magnified way out of proportion to what you might imagine. So you can't have a problem in a small company. It becomes poisonous, toxic in the atmosphere. Yeah. So it's not that easy. So what things did you find were difficult, or what things did you find were challenging as a leader for the first time in running that Japanese company?
In this company, because it was a small company, sure, I was the country manager. I didn't start off as the country manager. It was kind of attrition. So this company was an American company. It was then acquired by another American company. And the previous president was let go, and then they moved on, and then somebody else came in. So I was kind of like the sales director when I first started at that position. And through attrition, I worked for them for about 10 years. And so through attrition, I kind of became the de facto country manager.
What was the business? What was it? What was the industry you're in?
It was office products.
Okay.
It was an office products company. It's the world's largest office products company, actually. It's based out of Europe. And they have tons of small brands that you've probably heard of. In Japan, we were extremely small because the stationery market in Japan is huge, or it's dominated by Japanese manufacturers. So we were really kind of the small guy, and we were scraping and trying to get shelf space and promotional space, et cetera. But that actually taught me a lot as being, the small fish. And trying to, the David and Goliath story. Now we're a little bit more of the Goliath in my industry. And so sometimes my salespeople will discount or poo-poo some of the competition and say, oh, they're not. But hey, I've been there. So I know what their passion is. I know what their fire is. I know they're coming after us.
How hungry they are.
How hungry they are. But to get back to your question, because I started off as kind of the sales director, and through attrition, by default, I kind of became the country manager. I was doing a few things other than managing the office. I was still doing sales. I was still helping out with marketing. We were only 7 people. So I believe that leading through example was a good key lesson there. That's what I did. So I continued with the sales. I helped the 1-2 sales guys that we had. I still had my own accounts, but I was managing the business. So in that regards, it wasn't that difficult because I'd been with the company for a long time and I knew everything about the business, and I was still contributing to the income of the business. So it wasn't that difficult or big of a challenge, I would say.
When you've got 7 people like that and you've got your own clients, there's going to be a natural requirement from a time point of view to delegate a lot of accountability and responsibility to your team because you can't do everything. So how did you work that? How did that work for you to be holding these salespeople accountable for what they're doing while you're doing your thing?
Well, it was such a small company that I didn't delegate. I mean, I delegated some roles like the marketing role and the accounting and some of the back office and administrative type of things. But on the client-facing side, on the sales side, I worked hand in hand with the salespeople. We didn't have that many clients.
Okay.
It really wasn't that big of a business, and so I didn't have to say, okay, I'm now the country manager or the president of this company. Therefore, I'm not going to do this part of the sales business anymore. I'm going to give it to you. I'm going to delegate it to you. We really just didn't have that type of culture.
Okay, and so then you get into your current job and you've got a lot more people.
Yes.
How many people did the company have when you joined?
Over 200.
Wow.
Over 200, and we have maybe around 250 to today.
Wow, okay.
And,
so it's a big you're going from 7 to 200.
Yeah.
How do you make that transition where you've been hands-on, know everything about everything, and now you've got people in stores, you've got people in the headquarters, you've got a global organization, you've got a lot more attention on you, a lot more spotlight.
Yeah.
How did you make that jump, and what were the challenges that came up for you leading that organization?
Wow. Yeah, there were tons of challenges. Number one is I was entering into an industry that I knew nothing about. So it was like drinking from a fire hose, the proverbial saying that they have. So there was so much information that I had to digest just about the industry, learning about my industry, and learning about my people, and learning how we make our money, and at the same time trying to grow the business. So, and we'll get in, I know you have some questions probably about leadership, and I'll touch on some of those, but yeah, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy, and the challenge.
So here's a question, right? They have been in that business, and you turn up, and it's like, oh yeah, you speak Japanese, so what?
Yep.
We all speak Japanese too, by the way.
Yep.
Where's your value add here? You don't know any damn thing.
Right.
Why should we follow you?
Yep.
So how do you deal with that type of maybe unstated resistance, but probably resistance under the current?
Yeah, there was some with some people. Absolutely, there was that. But I believe, as I mentioned before, getting some quick wins. Well, even before that, I think you need to gain trust.
How do you get that trust?
And I gain trust mainly by, and it sounds cliche, but by being myself. And I'm a pretty social person. I'm pretty open with people. And I have a good communication. I like to think I have a good communication style with people. So I started off by interviewing all of my employees, finding out what they do, what their goals are, what their aspirations are. No, not all 200, because my company is split. We have a factory, which is in Gifu Prefecture, where we actually make kitchen knives. We have back office is there. The front office is all here in Tokyo. It's where the sales, it's where the marketing, it's where PR, it's where I am. So in the Tokyo office, we were about 30 people. So that was my first goal, was just to get to know my people, find out what they're doing, what their goals are, what their aspirations are, and try to connect with them. If you can connect with people, they will listen to you, and I think that leads to motivation. I believe it leads to engagement. And so we kind of started from there.
Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So how do you connect? I mean, you're American, they're Japanese. Okay, you lived in Japan. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So how do you connect with those people?
Well, first of all, I started with the one-on-one interviews. I tried to be myself. Part of the thing about being a foreign leader in Japan is that you're definitely going to make some mistakes. And being a foreigner in Japan, you're allowed a bit of some leeway, especially when it comes to cultural issues. So you're offered a few mulligans, as we say. However, I think it's important to own up to any mistakes that you make, to recognize them, maybe if they're not too egregious, maybe laugh them off a little bit, and just be open about it. And I think that leads to some trust, actually, and I think it leads to more engagement. So communication is really key when it comes to leadership, I believe. I mean, when it comes to leadership, okay, people say, what is leadership? And I think that's defined by the person in some regards. A lot of people say things like, leadership is being a motivator or having a lot of charisma or something like that for a good leader. But for me personally, I think leadership, it boils down to three things. Number one, first and foremost, you need to deliver results. It's performance. I mean, that's why you were hired. That's why I was hired, right? And sure, this motivation and the charisma part, that's part of it. But if you're just a motivator and you have charisma, but you're not delivering results, you're not a leader, you're just a cheerleader in my book.
So let's look at that a little bit, because you are not in the store selling product.
No.
You are not in the factory making product.
No.
You are working through your team. So when you say you deliver results, you are delivering results through your people. So help me to understand that a little bit more. When you say I deliver results, what does that mean?
Well, you're hired to continue the success. I mean, any leader in a way that's often, the analogy or simile, or I can never remember which one it is kind of like, the captain of the ship, right? Mm-hmm. You're sailing the ship. You're pointing it in the right direction, and you're making the decisions to help your people thrive and be successful. I believe that's also part of leadership. So
basically you're talking about you're responsible for the direction and the strategy part of it, and if that's working correctly, then you're going to have success. Is that as I should understand it?
Well, that's the macro view of it. So yes. On the micro view, however, you mentioned about my stores. I'd never worked in retail before. And at the time when I joined, we had 5 retail stores. We now have 38 retail stores throughout Japan. I take that back. I did work in retail.
Yeah.
So when I worked at the department store, I was a buyer, and I did everything from the glamorous, which was like going to New York and buying product, to the opposite of glamorous, which was sitting in a cold warehouse and inspecting the products that I bought and making sure that what I ordered is what delivered and put the price tags on them, et cetera, et cetera. And part of it was also visual merchandising. It was regular merchandising, all of these things. So I did all of that. So when it comes to our retail stores, when I talk to the store managers, the retail manager, and we talk about merchandising, we talk about visual merchandising, I've done that. And so I've had the experience there, and I kind of know a little bit, even though the product is a bit different, I kind of know what I'm talking about, and I have the experience. You can kind of, you can walk the talk. So having that, I believe, adds value because you have experience and you can introduce things that maybe they didn't think about, and that's what we did. So I gained some trust. My stock perhaps rose a teeny tiny bit at that point. So yeah.
And so in that sense, we talk about getting people motivated to perform. We're the leader, but we can't do all the work. They have to work through people. So a big part of that is getting people engaged. So I don't know whether in your company's case you have employee surveys, satisfaction surveys, engagement surveys or not. Do you have that type of thing?
That's a good question. You're totally correct. The engagement scores for Japan is always the lowest in the world. It's a very good question. We don't have like quantitative engagement scores. My engagement barometer is how engaged people are in my office. So it's kind of a feeling. However, if I could suggest, if you like to talk about engagement, you should definitely, for this podcast, I recommend that you talk with Rochelle Kopp, K-O-P-P. That's her specialty. I had her on my podcast. Fascinating.
I listened to that,
and she knows what she's talking about. She could speak about engagement much more intelligently, obviously, than I can. However, having said that, I think a lot of this low engagement discussion stems from the fact of hierarchy in the workplace, right? Japanese are very talented, very creative, outstanding, but in the right environment. Therefore, artists, writers, designers, craftsmen, some of the most talented in the world, but they are in an environment where they need to be creative. The workplace, on the other hand, has a lot of rules. We talked earlier about that, right? So a lot of set rules, which leads to being risk adverse, right? So the way I lead is I understand this. And so I think it's very important that when you're introducing a new concept, some new innovation, some new ideas, is that you get a group consensus on things. All of the players that are involved in whatever it is you're introducing, they need to be all in agreement, because if we do it all together, I mean, Japan is a collectivist society, right? They say misery loves company, but in this case, it's like risk loves company. So they're more apt to, as a group, take on any new challenges, because if it fails, nobody's responsible.
What you're describing here is a classic Ringi Seido, right? Of the Hancore, the stamps, everyone who's going to be impacted by this decision puts their personal seal on the piece of paper, which signifies I'm in agreement with this change.
Right.
And then, as you say, if it blows up, we're all responsible, therefore none of us are responsible. So it doesn't sound that very different from a very traditional Japanese, system of getting harmony. So you're a foreign company, so where's the difference here? It just sounds the same to me as what any Japanese company would do.
Might be. We're a foreign affiliated company. Therefore, I believe that a lot of my staff think that because we're a foreign company, that we will do things a little bit more, we won't take as many risks, or there won't be as many consequences for taking risks if you fail. And I try to what's the saying? I try to foster that environment because I am, a calculated risk taker. And, nothing ventured, nothing gained type mentality.
So you yourself personally, I notice you personally are very innovative. The way your mind thinks is very innovative. So how do you foster that feeling in your team that, look, we are here to take risks, learn, grow, be creative? How do you foster that?
As I mentioned, the group consensus is extremely important. I mean, I'm just like the next guy. I hate meetings for the sake of having meetings. But in this case, if there is a new innovation, if there's a new idea that needs to be presented, a new direction in the company that we're going to go, we need to get all the shareholders, all the stakeholders together, and we agree that we're going to do that. And it could take, longer than one day. It might take some time to foster that. But at the same time, myself as the leader, I need to let them feel comfortable that they have the freedom. I hesitate to use the word empowerment. Do you know how to say empowerment in Japanese?
Absolutely no idea.
Well, it's a good thing because the word doesn't exist in Japan. There is not a direct translation for empowerment as we understand the word for empowerment.
It's like the other word
Japanese.
is engagement. How do you explain engagement in Japanese? No word for it. Empowerment, no word for it.
And therein lies part of the problem. But empowerment is extremely important, and so I try to foster that. Just quick side story, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Every year, when the new year starts, we have kind of a sales conference where I present what the targets, both quantitative and qualitative, are for the company for that year, because we set the targets as a company at the company level, and then all the staff will set their own personal targets, and it'll filter down. So eventually, everyone exceeds their targets, then we reach the company target, right?
Now, is that target coming from headquarters overseas, and then you receive that number, and you say, okay, this is the number. Now, you tell me how you're going to get us to that number. Is that how it works?
Exactly.
Okay.
That's exactly how it works.
Right.
And everybody's bonus is based on achieving their personal targets, but also the company target as well. Okay, so we have this sales conference, and I'm presenting to everybody. And my theme was, and every year we have a theme, but this theme was talking about goal setting, target setting, and defaulting to the opportunity rather than defaulting to the risk. Because in Japan, they tend to default to the risk, right? Risk adverse. It goes back to all the things, ties back to all the things we were saying. So I'm giving this presentation, and I've got the slides, and I think it was like a branch in the road where the opportunity road went over to where the sun was shining, and then the other road for the risk went over to where it was raining and there were thunderbolts and stuff like that. So, and I was saying, hey, the opportunities are, we've got new channels, we've got new products, we've got new innovation, all this opportunity, right? The risk part of it is, the objection is going to be, oh, there's new buyers, we don't know them, they have too much inventory, we're too expensive, all the things why they can't reach their targets, right? So in my presentation, I said, look, when you set your targets this year, let's all default to the opportunity and not the risk. And I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, hey, here in Japan, we always default to the risk. We always, that's That's the way our society is, right? And in general, it is. However, I said to them, okay, so I know you guys are all thinking that I'm this American guy that's all optimistic and saying, hey, these are the opportunities, so do this. But I can prove to you that you can default to the opportunity. By a show of hands, how many of you here will not reach their targets and will not receive their bonuses this year? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand, of course, right? Okay, show of hands, how many of you will reach your targets just perfectly, just so you achieve 100% of your targets? Or sorry, you achieve 100% of your bonus. And a couple hands come up. All right, how many of you will exceed your targets and you will reach the maximum amount of bonus that you can get? Raise your hands. 95% of people, they all raise their hands. So I'm like, see, you can default to the opportunity, right? When it comes to your bonus, you can. Now, maybe they were defaulting to that because they were planning to default to the risk and make their targets very low, so they thought they would get high bonuses. But I think you understand my point.
I do. Yeah,
so
I do.
That's one story that I had in our company.
Well, one of the things too, as I say, in my experience working with you, dealing with you, you're a very innovative person. So often when you are an innovator yourself, you tend to become the central font of innovation. And this overflowing of this font of innovation, you're pouring out possible ideas all the time.
Yeah.
And sometimes that means that the people themselves are actually following your innovation and delivering and executing on that, as opposed to coming up with their own innovation. So how do you get people, what's the balance for you, I guess, between your ability to innovate, your drive on innovation yourself personally, and getting the team to be the ones who are actually stimulating the ideas, coming up with the new concepts?
Well, one of the benefits of being a larger manufacturing company is that I have 4 product managers for each category of my business. And so the product managers get a lot of input, not just from me, but from our headquarters. They get input from our factory. They get input from the salespeople who are out in the market that know what the customer wants and needs. So it doesn't all come from me, and that's fine. I don't want it to have to come from me because I'm not that type of leader where I stand up on a pedestal and I said, these are the golden rules, this is what we're gonna do. I don't, that's just not my style. Mm-hmm. So, what the market needs, combined with the direction of headquarters, combined with what our factory can do. And of course, I have input as well, but I'm not the major cheerleader for that, right? I allow my staff to come up with the ideas, to come up with the direction, and I kind of help them along the way. So I guess in this case, delegation is, and that's one of the things that I did have to learn. So going from a company of 7 people to a company of over 200, yes, I definitely needed to learn how to delegate, that's for sure. And in this case, that's exactly what it is.
And how do you have a delegation process you go through? How do you delegate? Because I'll give you an example. When I joined a company called Jones Lang Wooten, now called Jones Lang LaSalle, I joined the company. My boss came to my desk. He had 2 manila folders with all the paperwork of all the correspondence they'd had with Japan. And he just dumped it on my desk. And he said, okay, get to it. That was his delegation, right?
That's his delegation. Huh?
So I had to work out myself, how am I going to do this, right? And so when you say you delegate, do you have a particular way of delegating with people?
That's just pretty much common sense, I think, because if it's a marketing issue, it's marketing. If it's new product development, it's product managers.
Okay, well, let me be more specific. There's what we call dumping, which is like, okay, here's a project, get onto it,
right,
and goodbye, and I'll see you at sort of results time. And then there is other ways of getting people motivated to want to do it, because often as an employee, when your boss gives you jobs, you go, hang on a minute, I'm already busy. I was busy before. Now you're giving me your work as well. I can't even handle what I've got on my plate.
Yeah.
I resent you asking me to do this. I'm not motivated to do it.
Yeah.
So when you talk about delegation, there's delegation and there's delegation.
Right.
So I want to hear how you give a delegation the way that motivates people to want to do it.
Okay. In that regard, then I'm not a dumper. That's for sure.
Very good.
I'm not a dumper. So, no, I'm very sensitive to the workload of the staff. But I also trust them, and I believe in them. And I believe that they can do what it takes to accomplish their tasks. Mm-hmm. So when I have something new that I said, well, maybe I should give it to, Mr. A or Miss B or whatever, I kind of evaluate what it is, and I evaluate what I know is already on their plate, and just where it fits into the priority of things that we're doing. So I do make definitely a calculated decision on the weight of whatever it is that I need to delegate. And I just decide that way.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. I mean, that's first of all, you're making an intelligent selection based on a number of criteria, as opposed to a lot of bosses decide on, they look around, who doesn't look busy? Boom, and they give to that person.
No, we're all busy.
We're all busy.
We're all busy.
All right, so you've got a good innovative group there.
Yeah.
And do you get a situation where Japan becomes a stimulus to global for development? Because the Japanese consumer is so picky.
Yeah.
They're so difficult. And, it's like if you can make it in Japan with the consumer, you can make it anywhere. And things that the Japanese want, really, we don't necessarily think of. For example, you grew up in Australia, you got a big house. The refrigerator's noisy. Doesn't matter. It's a big house. You don't hear it. But in Japan, you got a small apartment. You don't have any noise coming out of Japanese refrigerators. You have Japanese refrigerators with doors open from both sides because of tight space. Don't need that. One side is fine in Australia. It's a big, huge refrigerator as well. But the Japanese have come up with a silent refrigerator because of the confinement. So that is an example where we wouldn't necessarily develop that type of product in the West, but the Japanese develop it. Yeah. And then you can take that overseas. It becomes like a sales point or a differentiable advantage. Has your team in Japan been able to come up with any product tweaks or differences that have then gone and said, wow, global, yeah, we want to take that concept from Japan and drive that through all of our businesses around the world?
Yeah. Well, we have a factory in Gifu that makes knives. So we're a German company, German cookware company, and we're most well known for kitchen knives, specifically German kitchen knives. However, because knives, there's a knife culture, a blade culture in Japan. Japanese knives have a great cutting edge. They have a different angle, a different profile. The handle is different, et cetera, et cetera. Japanese knives are very popular around the world. Japanese cuisine is very popular around the world. Therefore, Japanese knives are also extremely popular. So we actually manufacture Japanese knives for export. So we do, introduce our products that are made in Japan. They're not obviously as complex as a refrigerator, but they have probably the best cutting edge, the sharpest cutting edge of any knife in the world. So that's a little bit of an obvious example. However, another brand that we have, which is a French cast iron brand, it's made in France, very popular in Japan.
You're allowed to say the name. Promote the hell out of the business. Don't worry about that.
Stobe.
Yeah, very good. Tell us about it.
Yeah. So Stobe is extremely popular in Japan, especially with especially with professional chefs and people that are serious about cooking. Stobe is their pot of choice for sure. Okay, so. But because it's very popular with chefs, it comes from France, has a little bit of this image that, it's cast iron. Oh, you have to season it. It's heavy. It's difficult to work with. You could only cook French food in it, et cetera. It has a little bit. It had a little bit of this image to it. It's gained a lot of popularity, and what we did is we created a line which we call Japonesque, and it is a cast iron line that is specifically made for cooking Japanese food. So whether it's a rice, or it's like a wanabe, or it's like a donabe, we call it wanabe. We have a gohan kokote. We have some ceramic rice bowls that are made in Japan. We have a sukiyaki pan. So what we've done is we've taken some products that are made in France that have this European image to them, and we have applied them to the Japanese market. It's been hugely successful. However, these products also turned around, and what is a wanabe, which is kind of like a donabe in Japanese, now becomes a different name in a different market, and it sells quite well there. Or the rice, cocotte rice is popular all around the world, in Thailand, in Spain, in the US. And I mean, rice is extremely popular, not just with Asian cultures around the world, but rice is made everywhere. So this pot, this rice cocotte, is perfect for cooking rice. And suddenly what we developed here in Japan is now a bestseller in the US. It's a bestseller in Europe. It's a bestseller in many other markets.
So this must give the people in your team tremendous pride, because that Japanese innovation, that Japanese artisan mentality, that attention to detail, the quality, and for them to develop something here and then take that global, how did that impact the team?
Well, Japan, luckily, is one of the top 5 markets in the world for my organization. And I think most of our employees have a lot of pride. Well, first of all of the staff that work in my company are really passionate about our brand. They like to cook. We often exchange recipes. We talk about what we made. We are all heavy users of our products. So there's a lot of pride. I mean, the company this year is 290 years old. So there's a little bit of history there. So there's a lot of pride in working for this well-known brand. At the same time, there's a lot of pride in working for a company that's very successful. And as I mentioned, we're one of the top 5 countries in the whole group. And so I think there's a lot of pride in that. Because the Japanese knives that we export, that's part of the equation, but aside from the factory, it doesn't really touch most of the staff. The people in our factory are extremely proud of the success of these knives. So
this is interesting, right? You're dealing with people in an office environment all day long. Factory environment, totally different.
I'm not in charge of the factory.
Well, are you not responsible for the whole of Japan?
Yes, I am.
So the factory comes under your gamut?
Technically, yes.
Yeah.
But I am not shy to say that I don't have any manufacturing experience. And that's really not my wheelhouse. And that's not, I come from a sales background, client-facing, strategy, marketing type of background. That's what I really love.
So you've completely delegated the factory to the factory manager?
Yeah. Yes, we have a managing director, a technical managing director, and so he manages that.
Right, okay.
So I am responsible for everything, for every knife, once it becomes in the package.
Right.
And where it goes from there is now under my responsibility.
Okay, got it. All right. Okay, because, I experienced working with back office people for the first time when I worked around the National Australia Bank here. And that was a big shock for me because I've always been sales, marketing, front client greeting type of person. And then I met people who were really back office people, and the mentality and the whole dynamic was so different for me. I found it very perplexing to try and motivate them because what was interesting to me was not interesting to them.
Right.
And I've worked in factories, and when I was younger, I spent a lot of time in factories, so I understand what working in a factory is like. So, trying to lead people in that environment can be difficult. But you didn't have to do that, so that's all good.
No.
So if we talk about, say, one of the things I suppose too is building trust with people. We touched on that a little bit before. Let's go a bit deeper on that. How do you go about building trust with people? And now, particularly, we're going to include a little bit about COVID of this because I don't know about your company. Are your people all working in Shibuya? Are they in the headquarters or they're working at home?
No.
Right, okay. So,
well, if I could say, they're not all working from home. Some are in the office, some are at home. And that's another thing that I did was rather than just unilaterally say, no, you all have to work in the office or no, you all have to work at home, I actually initiated a anonymous survey where I asked all the employees, both in the office in Tokyo, but also in Seki. I gave them 4 choices. Number 1, work majority from home. Number 2, work a majority from the office. Number 3 was kind of a mix, 50-50. Or the 4th one would be work at the office but have flex time. Come a little bit late, come a little bit early, et cetera, so you could avoid the rush. And overwhelmingly was work a majority from home.
Right, okay. Right. So when we talk about leading and trust, et cetera, when we're in the office together, we're visually interacting with each other, we're chatting, we're talking, we're having meetings. So you build up that degree of touch and flexibility with people, builds the trust.
Yeah.
Now you're talking to people through a screen, you're not having that same ability to touch base with them. So what have you found has been different now for you as a leader compared to before? What have you had to adjust?
Surprisingly, one of the greatest fears I think for any leader during this COVID pandemic would be that if everyone's working from home, that productivity is going to go down. And knock on wood, so far that hasn't happened with us at all. So,
well, why is that?
I believe that I have trust in my staff. They're all qualified, they're professional, and they're going to, they still have targets. We, of course, halfway through, we adjusted some of our targets. Some of the projects we eliminated, and we prioritized what our tasks were. And this goes back to last year, 2020, and we're doing the same for this year. So, what they had on their plate at the beginning of the year was a lot different than what they had on their plate at the end of the year, right? But they still accomplished what they needed to do because they're professional and they're adults. So, I like being in the office. To be honest with you, I kind of like that environment. But what I found through that survey is that most people, and I did the same survey again for this year. I said, and this is before we had the current state of emergency, things are probably going to be getting better, but we've had this taste of what it's like to work from home. What do you want to do in 2021? And again, overwhelmingly, whether everyone has a vaccine, they still want to work from home.
So do you work from home too, or do you work in the office?
Sometimes.
So you're mainly in the office?
Mainly in the office. I'd say I'm about 80% in the office. A majority of the staff, I would say, are, some people are 50-50, but most people are like 80% at home, 20%. They come in maybe once a week, which is fine.
So I've found myself, February last year, we made a decision we would work at home. If you wanted to come into the office, no problem. If you need to come in the office, no problem. But predominantly, let's work at home, which we've been doing. But what I found was that the coordination of things became a lot more difficult. That I had, as a leader, I had to have a lot more conversations with people to connect things, to make sure that things were happening between people and people would know about things going on, because I was having one-on-one conversations this way, but the rotary connection, between those people wasn't there, which in a normal office meetings it would happen. So I found that much harder. How have you found it?
Well, we used to have, with all the managers, we used to have an in-person once a month meeting, right? Where everybody would, give updates, announce changes, and we would kind of set strategy. We'd get all on the same page once a month. Includes managers that are down in Gifu Prefecture as well. But what we've done now is, because we don't get together once a month, we tend to get together a little bit more often via Zoom. And so actually the communication has, I don't want to say it's improved, but it's maybe we do it twice a month, where everyone, and there's only about 9 of us that are in upper management, and so as long as we are all on the same page with everything, the communication is not a big deal, because I see them in the office maybe once or twice a week. We see everybody together a couple times a month, and then I'm not directly talking to every single a product manager and sales guy out there, and I leave that. Again, we kind of go back a little bit to delegation perhaps, but hey, it's 200 people. I leave that to the area managers, or to the sales director, sales manager, marketing director, et cetera. So, communication, I think, is always a very important thing, right? You can't have enough communication. But I'm not really frustrated by a lack of communication, or lack of direction, or lack of results. And one of the big differences between maybe a Japanese company and a foreign affiliated company is that Japanese companies really value input. How much are you contributing to the meeting? How much time are you spending in the office? How much are you, working overtime? So it's what you put into it. But what we value and what I value is output. Right. So what are your results? How you get there, how you get these results. The input is not really that important to me. It's the output at the end of the day. And that goes back to what I said about, delivering results. Is for a leader is, as a leader, delivering results isn't the only thing. We of course, engagement is extremely important. You need to communicate, you need to have empathy with people. And then also I would just add the qualities of a good leader also would be market intelligence, for sure, right? So you need to know your market. You need to know what are the trends. You need to know what are the new innovations. You need to stay ahead of the curve, because your staff expect you to know those things as a leader. They expect you to communicate what's going on in the market, whether it's not just Japan, but around the world. What are the trends in Europe and the US? Because eventually some of them might come to Japan as well. So communicating what these trends are within your industry is very important. So delivering results, have a good people skills, being engaged, and then market intelligence. For me, that's kind of my mantra, I guess, what I believe makes a good leader. But I don't really think that's Japan specific. I think that could translate to almost anywhere.
So Andrew, we've covered a lot of things in leadership.
Yes.
Is there anything I haven't asked you I should have?
Boy, you're very thorough in your questions. So one thing, if I may, for how many listeners or subscribers do you have? I heard it's like something like 100,000.
For our podcast?
Yes.
No, it's much smaller than that. This is a very niche, extremely niche,
now you're
very
being
niche
humble.
podcast. Yeah.
Now you're being humble. Well, for your tens of thousands of listeners, if you enjoyed what you heard today, and you enjoy Greg's podcasts that he has, I think you probably might enjoy my podcast.
Give us the name again.
Yeah. The name of my podcast is Now and Zen Japan.
Yep. Okay. Now and Zen Japan. Yep.
And you can find it on iTunes or any platform where you consume your podcasts.
And we're up to what episode now?
30.
30, episode 30.
30. But I don't do it as frequently as you. I mean, this is not my job. This is just kind of a side hobby that I like to do. I only upload 2, maybe 3 a month, but and I interview business people as well, like you do. But I also interview craftsmen. I interview people from the hospitality industry, areas that I'm really interested in. And they all have really fascinating stories, and they have a lot of great insight, both foreigners that have lived a long time in Japan and Japanese that are bilingual. It's in English. So if you like this podcast, you're also probably going to enjoy Now and Zen Japan. So check it out.
Good thinking.
Yeah.
All right. So if we're going to give some advice to someone who's being sent to Japan, okay. Your next assignment is Tokyo.
Yeah.
What would be 3 pieces of advice you'd give them?
All right. 3 pieces of advice. All right. It might sound cliche, but number 1 would be to enjoy the ride. And what I mean by that is it's your first time in Japan. So take day trips. Go to an onsen. Do some cultural things. Take a walk in a neighborhood. Try a new Japanese restaurant. And take these experiences back with you to the office and tell your staff about what you're doing. Because Japanese love it when foreigners are passionate or love their country. And probably what's going to happen is they are going to give you a recommendation on where you should go or what you should do next, and then you do it, and it becomes kind of like a positive, vicious circle in a way, but it leads to communication that's not just about business. And I think that also fosters a little bit of the trust angle.
Is this a humanization of leadership, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. But it's also sharing, because you're sharing your experience. And if you really loved that temple that you went to, or this new restaurant that you went to, or how shocked you were about what happened at the onsen or whatever, if you tell these kind of anecdotal stories to some of your staff, they're going to love it. They love these stories. So so definitely.
We connect with them on the human level through our cultural experience in Japan. Yep.
Yeah, correct. And so I would phrase that as enjoy the ride.
Right. Okay.
Second thing would be that I mentioned earlier is get some quick wins early in the current business environment that you have. Okay, so maybe some people are coming to Japan because they have to turn it around, or it was underperforming and they're there to, fix things, perhaps. I mean, that happens quite often. But Japanese hate change. So if you come in and you want to change the culture and you want to, create all these new radical, and you have all these new radical ideas, it's going to be met with a lot of negativity, and there's going to be a lot of pushback, and it's not going to be enjoyable, right? So if you get these quick wins early in whatever environment it is, you're going to get a little bit of momentum going, right? And so people are more apt to kind of believe in you, to follow you, trust you, and then, introducing maybe some of these more innovative, some bigger disruption ideas will probably be met with less resistance.
Actually, just to plug my own book there, chapter 30, I think it's the last chapter 30, last chapter. When you get a chance, have a look at the last chapter, you will smile.
Oh, really?
Because it talks exactly about that issue.
Oh, really?
You are sent here and how you will fail unless you have the right setup for being in Japan.
Oh, definitely.
And people don't understand that. And then they have all these issues of trying to force change. But very good advice. What's some other advice?
Another bit of advice, this might be more applicable to Americans, but is mentally prepare yourself for things to move or to develop a lot slower than you're used to, right? The decision-making process in Japan is slow, especially the sales process in Japan is extremely slow. I've lived here, I've worked here for 30 years, and I'm still sometimes surprised. I'm still sometimes frustrated at the pace of the way things transpire.
Don't you love that when your salespeople come to you and they say, yeah, we finally got that client. And you think, oh, that's great. And then you think back and you realize, hang on a minute, this has taken 4 years.
4 years, okay.
Or 3 years or something, because we have that. We have,
yeah.
We're now going to be doing training for the XYZ company. And you realize, hang on, we talked to those people 4 years ago, 3 years ago. It is a long cycle, isn't it?
Yeah. I think I mentioned this before, but it's very important about being yourself. But there's kind of like a fine line between adapting to the local culture and retaining your personal management style. So it doesn't do me any favors if I come in like, full on American and push my views and do it typical American style. It's not going to do much to really enhance my chances for success. At the same time, if I try to be Japanese, and you've seen it happen before, number one, you can't be, right? And if you try to, it's just going to creep people out, So it's kind of finding that sweet spot between localizing yourself and then kind of keeping your own personal management style and finding, like I said, that sweet spot, that balance, I should say. I think that's pretty important.
Well, it's what we're trying to do as companies. We're trying to find the best of two worlds here.
Yeah.
Bring best practice to Japan, but also localize for Japan. So same thing on a personal level, I guess.
Yeah.
Any final comments, Andrew? Any final advice before we wrap it up?
No. Thank you for your time today. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
I really love your books. This one is the Japan Business Mastery. It follows up on the Japanese Sales Mastery, which I read is a fantastic book.
Thank you.
And I'm looking forward to having you on my podcast.
Well, I welcome that. I'd love to be on your podcast. Yeah. I've got my Japanese word that you need to have that can't be translated ready to go.
Oh,
that's a segment, always a segment on your show, which I enjoy. But
thank you.
Andrew, thank you for today.
All right.
You're a very busy man. I appreciate that. And
my pleasure.
Please join us for the next episode of Japan's top business interviews.